Question 1. Compliance review shows an applicant for an Alaska concealed handgun permit is questioning the necessity of comprehensive firearm safety training beyond the basic legal minimum, stating they have prior experience with firearms. What approach best demonstrates a responsible understanding of risk assessment for obtaining and maintaining an Alaska concealed handgun permit? Option A. Focus on the legal right to carry a concealed handgun and downplay the significance of ongoing safety education. Option B. Argue that prior experience should be sufficient to waive the need for additional training, as it fulfills the basic competency requirement. Option C. Emphasize the importance of completing all recommended firearm safety training, even with prior experience, to ensure proficiency and awareness of Alaska-specific laws and best practices for responsible concealed carry. Option D. Suggests that the primary focus should be on passing the background check, as this is the most critical component of permit issuance. Correct answer is C. Emphasize the importance of completing all recommended firearm safety training, even with prior experience, to ensure proficiency and awareness of Alaska-specific laws and best practices for responsible concealed carry. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment in the context of firearm ownership and permit acquisition, specifically within Alaska's legal framework. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a proactive, responsible approach to safety and a reactive or dismissive one, which could have significant legal and ethical implications. Careful judgment is required to ensure the applicant prioritizes safety and compliance with Alaska statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating potential risks associated with firearm ownership. This means thoroughly understanding the requirements for a concealed handgun permit in Alaska, including any training or background check provisions, and taking steps to ensure personal suitability and responsible handling. This approach aligns with the spirit of Alaska's concealed handgun laws, which aim to permit responsible citizens to carry firearms for self-defense while minimizing public risk. It demonstrates a commitment to safety and legal compliance, which is paramount for any firearm permit holder. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that simply meeting the minimum legal requirements is sufficient, without considering personal circumstances or potential risks. This overlooks the ethical responsibility of a firearm owner to be exceptionally cautious and prepared. It fails to acknowledge that legal compliance is a baseline, not the entirety of responsible ownership. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the legal right to carry a concealed handgun, without adequately considering the responsibilities and potential dangers involved. This perspective prioritizes personal convenience or perceived entitlement over public safety and the potential for misuse. It neglects the critical element of risk assessment inherent in carrying a weapon. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the importance of safety training or background checks as mere bureaucratic hurdles. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of why these measures are in place to ensure that individuals are competent and law-abiding, thereby reducing the risk of accidents or criminal activity. Such an attitude is fundamentally at odds with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach firearm permit applications with a mindset of proactive responsibility. This involves not only understanding the letter of the law, but also its intent. A robust decision-making framework includes 1. Thoroughly researching and understanding all applicable state laws and regulations, in this case, Alaska statutes related to concealed handguns. 2. Honestly assessing personal suitability, including temperament, training needs, and commitment to safe storage and handling. 3. Prioritizing safety for oneself and the public above all else. 4. Seeking out and completing any recommended or required training beyond the minimum legal standard. 5. Being prepared to articulate how one will responsibly manage the risks associated with firearm ownership. Question 2. Process analysis reveals that an applicant for a concealed handgun permit in Alaska must demonstrate a commitment to responsible firearm ownership. Which of the following approaches best reflects a comprehensive risk assessment strategy for a permit holder in Alaska? Option A. Focusing exclusively on completing the mandatory training and passing the background check, assuming these fulfill all risk-related obligations. Option B. Proactively identifying specific locations where carrying is prohibited by Alaska law, assessing personal readiness and proficiency with the firearm, and considering the potential for conflict escalation in various social settings. Option C. Believing that once a permit is issued, the responsibility for ongoing risk assessment is minimal and can be largely disregarded. Option D. Relying solely on general advice about gun safety and the experiences of other permit holders, without conducting a personal, situation-specific risk evaluation. The correct answer is B. Proactively identifying specific locations where carrying is prohibited by Alaska law, assessing personal readiness and proficiency with the firearm, and considering the potential for conflict escalation in various social settings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to proactively identify and mitigate potential risks associated with carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of the law to a deeper, practical application of responsible gun ownership and risk assessment, which is crucial for public safety and legal compliance. A thorough risk assessment demonstrates a commitment to safe handling and awareness of the legal and ethical implications of carrying a firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive, proactive assessment of personal circumstances and the environment. This includes understanding the specific locations where carrying a concealed handgun is prohibited by Alaska law, e.g., schools, federal buildings, courthouses, evaluating personal readiness and proficiency with the firearm, and considering the potential for escalation of conflict in various social settings. This approach aligns with the spirit of Alaska's concealed handgun permit laws, which emphasize responsible and safe carrying. It demonstrates an understanding that obtaining a permit is not merely a legal formality, but a commitment to safe and lawful behavior. This proactive self-evaluation is ethically sound, as it prioritizes the safety of oneself and others by anticipating potential hazards and ensuring preparedness. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on the minimum legal requirements for obtaining a permit, such as completing the required training and passing the background check, without considering the broader implications of carrying a concealed handgun in daily life. This overlooks the ethical responsibility to be constantly aware of one's surroundings and the potential risks associated with carrying a firearm. It fails to address the practical aspects of safe gun handling and conflict de-escalation, which are vital for preventing accidental shootings or the misuse of a firearm. Another incorrect approach is to assume that once a permit is obtained, the responsibility for risk assessment diminishes. This perspective is flawed because the legal landscape and personal circumstances can change. Failing to continuously reevaluate potential risks, such as changes in personal stress levels, awareness of local crime trends, or the introduction of new environments where carrying might be inadvisable, demonstrates a lack of ongoing commitment to responsible gun ownership. This can lead to situations where a permit holder inadvertently places themselves or others in danger. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the advice of others or on generalized information about gun safety without conducting a personal, situation-specific risk assessment. While seeking advice is valuable, each individual's circumstances and the environments they frequent are unique. A generalized understanding may not adequately prepare an individual for the specific challenges they might face in Alaska, such as navigating remote areas or diverse social gatherings. This approach lacks the personalized diligence required for responsible concealed carry. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive risk identification and mitigation. This involves understanding the legal framework thoroughly, but also engaging in continuous self-assessment and environmental awareness. Before carrying a concealed handgun, an individual should ask, am I legally permitted to carry in this specific location? Am I mentally and physically prepared to handle a potential confrontation safely and responsibly? Are there alternative, non-lethal methods to resolve this situation if it arises? This iterative process of questioning and evaluation ensures that carrying a concealed handgun is a last resort, undertaken with the utmost caution and responsibility. Question 3. What factors determine an applicant's eligibility for a concealed handgun permit in Alaska, particularly concerning past mental health adjudications or substance abuse issues? Option A. The applicant's assumption that any past mental health or substance abuse issue, regardless of its nature or recency, does not automatically disqualify them without direct confirmation from the relevant authorities. Option B. Information obtained from informal sources such as friends or online forums regarding eligibility for concealed handgun permits. Option C. A comprehensive review of the applicant's personal history against the specific disqualifying criteria outlined in Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16, Part 2, with a proactive approach to seek clarification from legal counsel or the Alaska Department of Public Safety if any doubt exists regarding past issues. Option D. The applicant's subjective belief that past mental health or substance abuse issues were minor or have been resolved, without verifying specific statutory requirements. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive review of the applicant's personal history against the specific disqualifying criteria outlined in Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16, Part 2, with a proactive approach to seek clarification from legal counsel or the Alaska Department of Public Safety if any doubt exists regarding past issues. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to self-assess their suitability for carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska, a state with specific legal requirements, and a strong emphasis on responsible firearm ownership. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the Alaska statutes concerning eligibility for a concealed handgun permit, particularly regarding mental health and substance abuse history, without misrepresenting information or misunderstanding the legal thresholds. Careful judgment is required to ensure full compliance with the law and to uphold public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and honest self-assessment of one's history against the specific criteria outlined in Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16, Part 2, Concealed Handgun Permits. This includes meticulously reviewing personal history related to mental health adjudications, involuntary commitments, and substance abuse convictions or treatment. The applicant must understand that any misrepresentation or omission of relevant information on the application is a criminal offense. Therefore, the most appropriate approach is to consult the relevant Alaska statutes directly, and if there is any doubt about eligibility based on past experiences, to seek clarification from legal counsel or the Alaska Department of Public Safety before submitting the application. This ensures accuracy and adherence to the legal framework governing concealed handgun permits in Alaska. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a past mental health issue or substance abuse problem, even if resolved, does not affect eligibility without verifying the specific statutory language. Alaska law may have specific disqualifiers related to certain types of adjudications or periods of treatment, regardless of current status. Failing to confirm this directly with the statutes or relevant authorities constitutes a significant regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal advice from friends or online forums regarding eligibility. Such information is often inaccurate, outdated, or does not reflect the precise legal standards set forth in Alaska statutes. This approach risks misinterpreting the law and submitting an application that is either doomed to be denied or, worse, contains false information, leading to criminal charges. A third incorrect approach is to believe that if a past issue was minor or occurred many years ago, it automatically disqualifies the applicant from needing to disclose it. Alaska law requires disclosure of all relevant history, and the determination of disqualification is made by the permitting authority based on the statutory criteria, not by the applicant's personal assessment of significance. Omitting such information is a direct violation of the application's truthfulness requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking a concealed handgun permit in Alaska should adopt a proactive and diligent approach. This involves 1. Obtaining and thoroughly reading the official Alaska statutes pertaining to concealed handgun permits. 2. Honestly evaluating one's personal history against each statutory disqualifier. 3. If any ambiguity exists regarding past mental health or substance abuse history and its impact on eligibility, seeking professional legal advice or direct clarification from the Alaska Department of Public Safety. 4. Completing the application truthfully and completely, understanding that any misrepresentation carries severe legal consequences. This systematic process ensures compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that an applicant for an Alaska concealed handgun permit is considering how to store their handgun in their vehicle when it is not on their person. They are weighing options that balance convenience with security, Which of the following storage methods best demonstrates an understanding of responsible firearm risk assessment and compliance with the principles underlying Alaska's concealed handgun permit requirements? Option A. Storing the handgun in the glove compartment, ensuring it is latched. Option B. Storing the handgun in a locked container or a secure holster with a retention mechanism placed in the trunk or out of plain sight in the passenger compartment. Option C. Leaving the handgun in a holster on the passenger seat, even if the holster has a retention strap. Option D. Placing the handgun in a zipped backpack on the floor of the back seat. The correct answer is B. Storing the handgun in a locked container or a secure holster with a retention mechanism placed in the trunk or out of plain sight in the passenger compartment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate an understanding of risk assessment in the context of concealed handgun permit requirements in Alaska, specifically concerning the responsible storage of firearms when not in immediate possession. The challenge lies in balancing personal convenience with the paramount importance of public safety and legal compliance. Misinterpreting or neglecting these aspects can lead to permit denial, legal repercussions, and most importantly, an increased risk of firearm misuse or theft. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the secure storage of the handgun in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, even if it means a slight inconvenience. This approach aligns with the spirit and letter of Alaska's laws regarding responsible firearm ownership and the prevention of accidental discharge or access by prohibited individuals. Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 52, Section 11, 61, 190, while not mandating specific storage devices for permit holders, emphasizes the importance of preventing access by minors and other unauthorized persons. A locked container or a secure holster with a retention mechanism, stored away from the vehicle's passenger compartment and out of plain sight, directly addresses this risk by making unauthorized access significantly more difficult. This demonstrates a commitment to safety and legal compliance, which are fundamental to obtaining and maintaining a concealed handgun permit. Incorrect approaches analysis. Storing the handgun in the glove compartment without a lock, even if the glove compartment is latched, presents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. While seemingly convenient, a glove compartment is easily accessible and often not considered a secure storage solution, especially if the vehicle is left unattended. This increases the risk of theft or unauthorized access by minors or other individuals who might gain entry to the vehicle. It fails to meet the implied standard of responsible firearm storage that underpins the concealed handgun permit system. Leaving the handgun in a holster on the passenger seat, even if the holster has a retention strap, is also professionally unacceptable. This method leaves the firearm in plain view and easily accessible to anyone who can access the vehicle's interior. It directly contradicts the principle of preventing unauthorized access and significantly elevates the risk of theft or accidental misuse. Placing the handgun in a backpack on the floor of the back seat, even if the backpack is zipped, is insufficient. While the zipper offers a minimal barrier, a backpack is not a secure container designed to prevent unauthorized access or accidental discharge. It can be easily opened, and the firearm remains vulnerable to theft or discovery by unauthorized individuals, failing to meet the standard of responsible firearm storage. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking or holding a concealed handgun permit in Alaska should adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This framework prioritizes safety and legal compliance above all else. When considering firearm storage, the primary question should be, does this method prevent unauthorized access by minors and prohibited individuals? And does this method minimize the risk of theft or accidental discharge? The applicant should always err on the side of caution, choosing the most secure storage option available, even if it requires a minor inconvenience. This proactive approach demonstrates maturity and responsibility, essential qualities for any firearm permit holder. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that an individual carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska is confronted by another person who is verbally aggressive and displaying a firearm openly. The individual with the concealed handgun feels threatened but is not being physically attacked. Considering the legal framework for the use of force in Alaska, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Engage in a verbal argument to understand the aggressor's intentions before deciding on a course of action. Option B. Maintain a safe distance, verbally de-escalate the situation if possible, and avoid any physical confrontation or drawing of the firearm unless there is an imminent threat of unlawful deadly physical force. Option C. Assume the open display of a firearm constitutes an immediate threat and use the concealed handgun to neutralize the perceived danger. Option D. Immediately draw the concealed handgun to deter the aggressive individual and prepare to defend oneself. The correct answer is B. Maintain a safe distance, verbally de-escalate the situation if possible, and avoid any physical confrontation or drawing of the firearm unless there is an imminent threat of unlawful deadly physical force. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska. The core challenge lies in accurately assessing a perceived threat and determining if the use of deadly force is legally justified and ethically sound, all while under extreme stress. Misjudgment can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and profound ethical repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective assessment of the immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and avoidance whenever possible, and only considers the use of a firearm as a last resort when all other reasonable options have been exhausted and the threat is imminent and unavoidable. This aligns with Alaska Statute 11-81-450, which outlines the justification for the use of deadly physical force, requiring that the person reasonably believes such force is necessary to protect themselves or another person from what they reasonably believe to be the imminent use of unlawful deadly physical force. It emphasizes the objective reasonableness of the belief, not just the subjective feeling of fear. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves reacting solely based on a subjective feeling of fear or intimidation without a clear, imminent threat of unlawful deadly physical force. This fails to meet the legal standard of reasonable belief required by Alaska law and could lead to unjustified use of force. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the mere presence of a weapon by another individual constitutes an immediate threat, justifying the use of deadly force. Alaska law requires a reasonable belief that unlawful deadly physical force is about to be used, not simply the observation of a weapon. A further incorrect approach is to escalate a verbal dispute or minor confrontation into a situation where deadly force is considered. The law generally requires that the threat be of serious bodily harm or death, and de-escalation or retreat, if safe and feasible, are preferred over the use of force. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that includes 1. Threat assessment. Objectively evaluate the nature, imminence, and severity of the threat. 2. Legal justification. Determine if the situation meets the legal criteria for the use of deadly force under Alaska law. 3. Proportionality. Ensure the force used is proportional to the threat. 4. De-escalation and avoidance. Prioritize non-violent resolution and escape if possible. 5. Post-incident protocol. Understand reporting requirements and legal counsel needs. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Which of the following strategies would be the most effective and legally compliant method for addressing this issue? Option A. Immediately expedite all pending applications to reduce the backlog, regardless of the stage of processing. Option B. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific stages causing delays and implement targeted process improvements. Option C. Hire additional staff for all departments involved in permit processing without first identifying specific areas of inefficiency. Option D. Maintain current processing procedures and focus resources on other agency priorities, as the current metrics are within acceptable, albeit slower, ranges. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific stages causing delays and implement targeted process improvements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-regulated process. Delays can lead to individuals who may be eligible for a permit experiencing undue waiting periods, while potentially creating a backlog that strains resources. Careful judgment is required to balance thoroughness in vetting applicants with the need for timely processing, all within the strict confines of Alaska statutes. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks. This includes analyzing each stage of the process, from initial submission to background checks and final permit issuance, to pinpoint where delays are occurring. By focusing on data-driven insights into processing times at each step, the responsible agency can then implement targeted improvements, such as optimizing data entry procedures, streamlining communication with law enforcement agencies for background checks, or reallocating personnel to high-demand areas. This aligns with the principles of efficient government administration and the statutory requirement to process applications in a timely manner as outlined in Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, specifically as 1161, 140, which governs the issuance of permits and implies a reasonable processing timeframe. An incorrect approach would be to implement a blanket policy of expediting all applications without a thorough analysis of the underlying causes of the delays. This could compromise the integrity of the background check process, potentially leading to the issuance of permits to individuals who do not meet the statutory requirements, thereby undermining public safety and violating the spirit and letter of As 1161, 140. Another incorrect approach would be to simply increase staffing levels across the board without identifying the specific areas of inefficiency. While more staff might seem like a solution, it could be an inefficient use of resources if the bottlenecks are in technology or interagency communication, rather than sheer volume of work. This fails to address the root cause of the performance metric deviations. Finally, ignoring the performance metrics altogether and continuing with the current processes would be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to uphold the duty to administer the concealed handgun permit system effectively and efficiently, as expected of a state agency. Professionals should employ a data-driven, process-oriented decision-making framework. This involves 1. Defining the problem performance metric deviations, 2. Gathering relevant data application processing times by stage, 3. Analyzing the data to identify root causes bottlenecks, 4. Developing and evaluating potential solutions, workflow optimization, 5. Implementing the chosen solution, and 6. Monitoring the results to ensure sustained improvement. This systematic approach ensures that interventions are targeted, effective, and compliant with all applicable Alaska statutes. Question 7. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the legal framework established by Alaska statutes and administrative code, which of the following strategies would be the most appropriate and legally sound method to address this issue? Option A. Engage an external vendor to conduct background checks, assuming they possess the necessary clearances, without establishing a robust oversight mechanism to ensure data integrity and legal compliance. Option B. Implement a policy to expedite background checks by reducing the scope of inquiry or accepting preliminary results without full verification to meet processing time targets. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the entire application workflow, from submission to final decision, to identify specific procedural bottlenecks and areas where compliance with As 1161, 210, and 3 AAC 70 can be optimized without compromising thoroughness. Option D. Prioritize applications based on the perceived urgency or status of the applicant, such as law enforcement personnel or individuals with documented threats, to reduce overall backlog. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the entire application workflow, from submission to final decision, to identify specific procedural bottlenecks and areas where compliance with As 1161, 210, and 3 AAC 70 can be optimized without compromising thoroughness. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the efficient processing of applications with the absolute necessity of adhering to Alaska's stringent legal requirements for firearm permits, ensuring public safety and individual rights are upheld. A delay in processing can impact an applicant's ability to exercise their Second Amendment rights, while an improperly processed application could lead to a permit being issued to an ineligible individual, posing a significant public safety risk. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause of the delays and implement solutions that are both effective and legally compliant. The best approach involves a thorough review of the application intake and background check procedures to identify bottlenecks. This includes examining the Alaska statutes and administrative code pertaining to concealed handgun permits, specifically as 1161, 210, and 3 Oct 70, which outline the requirements for permit issuance, including background checks and disqualifying factors. By systematically analyzing each step of the process against these legal mandates, the underlying reasons for the increased processing times can be accurately identified. This allows for targeted improvements, such as streamlining data entry, enhancing communication with federal agencies for background checks, or reallocating resources, all while ensuring no legal requirements are bypassed. This methodical, legally grounded approach prioritizes both efficiency and compliance, which is paramount in firearm permitting. An approach that focuses solely on expediting the background check process by reducing the depth of inquiry or relying on incomplete data would be professionally unacceptable. This would directly violate the spirit and letter of Alaska's laws, which mandate comprehensive checks to ensure public safety. Such an action could lead to the issuance of permits to individuals who are legally disqualified, creating a significant ethical and legal liability for the issuing authority. Another unacceptable approach would be to implement a blanket policy of prioritizing certain types of applicants over others without a clear legal basis. Alaska law does not permit discretionary prioritization of permit applications based on factors not outlined in statute. This would be discriminatory and could lead to legal challenges, undermining the integrity of the permitting system. Finally, an approach that involves outsourcing the background check process to an unqualified third party without proper oversight or adherence to data security protocols would also be a failure. This could compromise sensitive personal information and potentially lead to inaccurate background checks, again violating legal and ethical obligations. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and regulations. This should be followed by data-driven analysis to pinpoint the specific issues causing delays. Solutions should then be developed and evaluated for their compliance with Alaska law, their potential impact on public safety, and their efficiency. Regular review and adaptation of the process, always in consultation with legal counsel and relevant state agencies, are crucial for maintaining an effective and lawful concealed handgun permit system. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average processing time for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska over the past quarter. Considering the need to maintain public safety while ensuring efficient service delivery, which of the following strategies would best address this issue? Option A. Reduce the thoroughness of background checks to expedite the review process for all applicants. Option B. Conduct a detailed analysis of the application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks in background checks, data processing, and interagency communication, and implement targeted procedural improvements. Option C. Immediately hire additional administrative staff to handle the increased application volume, without first identifying the specific causes of the delays. Option D. Implement a system to prioritize applications based on the applicant's stated reason for needing a concealed handgun permit. Correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed analysis of the application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks in background checks, data processing, and interagency communication, and implement targeted procedural improvements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-regulated process. Delays can lead to individuals who are legally entitled to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense facing prolonged waiting periods, while potentially unqualified individuals might also experience delays in their background checks. Balancing thoroughness with efficiency is paramount, requiring a nuanced understanding of Alaska's specific statutes and administrative procedures. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks, focusing on areas where delays are most pronounced. This includes analyzing the time taken for background checks, the efficiency of data entry, and the turnaround time for communication with applicants and other agencies. The goal is to streamline these processes without compromising the integrity of the background investigation, which is mandated by Alaska law to ensure public safety. This proactive, data-driven review aligns with the state's interest in administering the concealed handgun permit program effectively and responsibly, as outlined in Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, Part 2. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase staffing levels without understanding the root cause of the delays. This is a costly and potentially ineffective solution if the underlying issues are procedural or technological. It fails to address the core problem and may not lead to significant improvements in processing times. Another incorrect approach is to expedite background checks by reducing the depth or scope of the investigation. This is ethically and legally unacceptable, as it directly contravenes the purpose of the background check, which is to identify individuals who may pose a risk to public safety. Alaska law requires a thorough investigation, and any deviation from this standard would be a serious regulatory failure. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize applications based on arbitrary criteria, such as the applicant's perceived need for a permit. This introduces bias into the process and is not supported by Alaska's concealed handgun permit statutes, which mandate a standardized process for all applicants. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem using available performance data. Next, they should identify potential causes for the observed issues, considering both procedural and systemic factors. Then, they should research and understand the specific legal and regulatory requirements of Alaska's concealed handgun permit program to ensure any proposed solutions are compliant. Finally, they should develop and implement solutions that are data-informed, legally sound, and ethically responsible, with a mechanism for ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Question 9. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the need to maintain public safety and adhere to Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16, which of the following strategies would be the most effective and legally compliant method to address these extended processing times? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the entire application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and implement targeted process improvements, such as enhancing interagency communication for background checks and standardizing review procedures. Option B. Implement a system that prioritizes applications based on perceived urgency rather than a standardized processing order. Option C. Immediately hire additional administrative staff to process applications faster without first analyzing the specific reasons for the current delays. Option D. Reduce the scope and depth of the background checks performed on applicants to expedite the review process. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the entire application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and implement targeted process improvements, such as enhancing interagency communication for background checks and standardizing review procedures. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-regulated process. Delays can lead to individuals who are legally entitled to carry a concealed handgun being unable to do so, or conversely, potentially allowing individuals who should not be permitted to carry to remain in the application pipeline for an extended period. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with thoroughness and adherence to Alaska's specific statutory requirements for permit issuance. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks and implement targeted improvements. This includes analyzing each stage of the process, from initial submission to background checks and final permit issuance, to pinpoint areas where delays are most significant. Implementing process optimization techniques, such as streamlining data entry, improving interagency communication for background checks, and standardizing review procedures, can significantly reduce processing times without compromising the integrity of the background investigation mandated by Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16. This approach prioritizes both efficiency and compliance with the legal framework governing concealed handgun permits in Alaska. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase staffing without understanding the root cause of the delays. While more personnel might seem like a solution, it could be inefficient if the underlying processes are flawed. For instance, if the bottleneck is an external agency's slow response time for background checks, adding more Alaska State troopers to review applications will not resolve the primary issue and represents a misallocation of resources, potentially violating principles of fiscal responsibility in public administration. Another incorrect approach is to expedite the background check process by reducing the depth or scope of the investigation. Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 16, specifically outlines the requirements for background checks, including criminal history and mental health evaluations. Circumventing these requirements, even with good intentions to reduce wait times, would be a direct violation of state law and would compromise public safety by potentially issuing permits to individuals who pose a risk. This failure to adhere to statutory mandates is ethically and legally unacceptable. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to focus solely on reducing the number of applications processed, rather than improving the efficiency of the process itself. This would create an artificial backlog and deny timely access to permits for eligible citizens, which is contrary to the purpose of the permitting system. Professionals should employ a data-driven decision-making framework. This involves 1. Defining the problem clearly, e.g., excessive processing times. 2. Collecting and analyzing relevant data to identify root causes. 3. Developing and evaluating potential solutions based on their feasibility, effectiveness, and compliance with Alaska statutes. 4. Implementing the chosen solution. And 5. Monitoring the results and making further adjustments as needed. This iterative process ensures that improvements are sustainable and align with both operational goals and legal obligations. Question 10. The performance metrics show a 15% reduction in the average processing time for concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska over the last fiscal year, alongside a 10% increase in the number of applications processed. What is the most appropriate method to validate that this efficiency gain has not compromised the thoroughness of the background investigations required by Alaska law? Option A. Conduct a comparative analysis of a statistically significant sample of applications processed before and after the optimization, verifying that all required background check components, e.g., criminal history, mental health records, relevant databases, were investigated to the same depth and standard as per Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15. Option B. Focus solely on the increased volume of applications processed, interpreting the efficiency gain as a positive indicator of overall process improvement without further investigation into the background check methodology. Option C. Assume that the reduction in processing time is a direct result of improved technology and streamlined administrative procedures, and therefore, the thoroughness of background checks is inherently maintained. Option D. Implement a new, faster background check protocol that relies on automated flagging of obvious disqualifiers, reducing the need for manual review of less critical information for a portion of applicants. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comparative analysis of a statistically significant sample of applications processed before and after the optimization, verifying that all required background check components, e.g., criminal history, mental health records, relevant databases, were investigated to the same depth and standard as per Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of concealed handgun permit applications processed in Alaska over the past quarter, alongside a slight decrease in the average processing time per application. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing efficiency gains with the absolute necessity of thorough background checks, as mandated by Alaska law for concealed handgun permits. The pressure to reduce processing times must not compromise the integrity of the vetting process, which is paramount for public safety and adherence to legal requirements. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the process optimization to identify specific bottlenecks that were addressed, leading to the time reduction, while simultaneously verifying that no critical steps in the background check were abbreviated or omitted. This requires cross-referencing the optimized workflow against Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, specifically as 11.15.150, which outlines the requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun license, including the mandatory background investigation. The optimization should have focused on administrative efficiencies, such as improved data entry or streamlined communication between agencies, rather than compromising the depth of the investigative process. For example, implementing a digital submission system that automatically flags incomplete applications or expedites the retrieval of necessary records from law enforcement agencies would be a valid optimization. An incorrect approach would be to attribute the time reduction solely to a faster review of applicant information, without confirming that the depth of the background check, including criminal history, mental health records, and any other disqualifying factors as stipulated by Alaska law, remained unchanged. This could lead to a situation where potentially dangerous individuals are granted permits due to a superficial review. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a statistical sampling method for background checks, where only a percentage of applications undergo the full scrutiny. This directly violates the requirement for a comprehensive investigation for every applicant as implied by the intent of As 11, 15, 150. Furthermore, assuming that a reduction in processing time automatically equates to improved performance without a concurrent audit of the quality and completeness of the background checks is a critical failure. The focus must always be on meeting the legal standard for permit issuance, not just on speed. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety above all else. When performance metrics indicate changes in processing times, the immediate next step should be to investigate the cause of the change. This investigation must include a detailed review of the process to ensure that any efficiency gains are achieved through legitimate means that do not compromise the legally mandated standards for background checks. A robust internal audit process, comparing the current workflow against the requirements of Alaska statutes, is essential. If metrics suggest a potential compromise, the process must be immediately re-evaluated and adjusted to ensure full compliance. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that when reviewing an application for a concealed handgun permit in Alaska, an officer encounters information suggesting the applicant may have a history of volatile behavior, though no specific criminal charges or formal mental health commitments are immediately apparent. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Alaska's concealed handgun permit regulations? Option A. Delay the decision indefinitely pending further unspecified investigations, without informing the applicant of the reasons for the delay. Option B. Deny the permit application based on the officer's subjective assessment of the applicant's potentially volatile demeanor, as this raises general safety concerns. Option C. Issue the permit without further inquiry, assuming the applicant is qualified unless concrete disqualifying evidence is presented. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's background, seeking objective evidence of any disqualifying factors as defined by Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, and consult relevant databases, and if necessary, request additional information from the applicant or other authorized sources. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's background, seeking objective evidence of any disqualifying factors as defined by Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, and consult relevant databases, and if necessary, request additional information from the applicant or other authorized sources. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that navigating the nuances of Alaska's concealed handgun permit requirements, particularly concerning the definition of reasonable cause for refusal, presents a significant professional challenge. Law enforcement officers must balance public safety with individual rights, requiring careful judgment to avoid both unwarranted denial and potential risks. The scenario demands a thorough understanding of Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, specifically as 11, 61, 200 and as 11, 61, 210, which govern the issuance and denial of concealed handgun permits. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of all submitted documentation and a thorough investigation into any information that raises a legitimate concern about the applicant's suitability to carry a concealed handgun. This includes scrutinizing criminal history, mental health records, and any other factors that might indicate a propensity for violence or an inability to safely handle a firearm. The Alaska Department of Public Safety's guidelines, while not explicitly defining reasonable cause in exhaustive detail, emphasize that denials must be based on specific statutory grounds, such as felony convictions, certain misdemeanor convictions, or documented instances of domestic violence or mental instability that pose a clear danger. A refusal must be supported by objective evidence that directly relates to the applicant's fitness to possess a firearm under Alaska law. An approach that relies on generalized suspicion or unsubstantiated rumors without concrete evidence is professionally unacceptable. Such an approach fails to meet the legal standard for reasonable cause and infringes upon an individual's rights. Similarly, an approach that dismisses concerns based solely on the applicant's perceived demeanor or personal opinions, without a factual basis tied to statutory disqualifications, is also flawed. Furthermore, an approach that delays the process indefinitely without a clear, legally justifiable reason, or that fails to provide the applicant with proper notification of the grounds for denial and the appeal process, violates due process requirements and administrative fairness principles. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence and adherence to statutory mandates. This involves a systematic review process, diligent investigation of any red flags, consultation with legal counsel when necessary, and clear, documented communication with the applicant. The focus must always be on whether the applicant meets or fails to meet the specific legal criteria for permit issuance or denial as outlined in Alaska statutes. Question 12. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the need to maintain public safety while ensuring efficient service, which of the following strategies would be the most professionally sound and compliant with Alaska's regulatory framework for concealed handgun permits? Option A. Immediately hire additional staff to process applications, assuming that increased manpower will directly reduce processing times. Option B. Expedite the background check process by reducing the depth of inquiry for all applicants to meet faster turnaround goals. Option C. Focus solely on improving the initial intake speed of applications, without evaluating the subsequent review and approval stages. Option D. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, from submission to final approval, and implement targeted improvements based on this data. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, from submission to final approval, and implement targeted improvements based on this data. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-mandated process. Delays can lead to individuals who may be eligible for a permit experiencing undue frustration, while potentially posing a risk if they are denied a permit they are legally entitled to, or conversely, if the process is so streamlined that it compromises thoroughness. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with the critical need for due diligence in background checks. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify specific bottlenecks, followed by targeted process improvements. This includes analyzing each stage of the application process, from submission to final approval, to pinpoint where delays are occurring. This might involve evaluating the efficiency of background check systems, the clarity of application instructions, or the staffing levels dedicated to permit processing. Implementing improvements based on this data-driven analysis, such as digitizing certain steps or reallocating resources, directly addresses the performance metric deviations while adhering to Alaska's statutory requirements for permit issuance, which prioritize public safety through thorough vetting. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase staffing without understanding the root cause of the delays. This could lead to increased costs without a proportional improvement in processing times if the bottleneck lies in technology or procedural inefficiencies. It fails to address the underlying issues and represents a reactive, rather than a proactive, solution. Another incorrect approach is to relax the background check standards to speed up processing. This is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable in Alaska. Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, Section 1545 outlines the requirements for concealed handgun permits, which include thorough background checks to ensure public safety. Compromising these checks would violate the spirit and letter of the law, potentially leading to the issuance of permits to individuals who pose a risk. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the speed of initial application intake, without considering the subsequent review and approval stages. Efficiency must be evaluated across the entire process. Ignoring downstream delays would be a superficial fix that does not resolve the overall performance issue. Professionals should employ a data-driven decision-making framework. This involves 1. Defining the problem clearly, e.g., increased application processing times. 2. Gathering relevant data, e.g., processing times at each stage, error rates. 3. Analyzing the data to identify root causes. 4. Developing potential solutions based on the analysis. 5. Evaluating the feasibility and regulatory compliance of each solution. 6. Implementing the chosen solution and monitoring its effectiveness. 7. Iterating as necessary. This systematic process ensures that improvements are targeted, effective, and compliant with all legal and ethical obligations. Question 13. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the need for both public safety and efficient service delivery, which of the following strategies represents the most effective and legally compliant method for addressing this trend? Option A. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process. Implement targeted technological solutions for data management and communication, and ensure adequate staffing levels are maintained to handle the application volume efficiently, all while strictly adhering to Alaska's background check requirements. Option B. Implement a system that prioritizes applications based on the applicant's stated reason for needing a permit, such as employment or self-defense concerns, to speed up approvals for those deemed most urgent. Option C. Reduce the thoroughness of background checks for all applicants to expedite the approval process, prioritizing speed over comprehensive vetting. Option D. Immediately hire additional staff to process applications, assuming that increased personnel will directly reduce processing times without further investigation into the existing workflow. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process. Implement targeted technological solutions for data management and communication, and ensure adequate staffing levels are maintained to handle the application volume efficiently, all while strictly adhering to Alaska's background check requirements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of justice. Delays can lead to individuals who are legally entitled to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense facing prolonged waiting periods, while potentially allowing individuals who pose a risk to remain unvetted for an extended duration. A careful balance must be struck between thoroughness and expediency, adhering strictly to Alaska statutes. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks and implement targeted improvements without compromising the integrity of the background check process. This includes analyzing each stage of the application, from submission to final approval, to pinpoint areas where delays are most pronounced. Implementing technology to streamline data entry, improving interagency communication for faster background checks, and ensuring adequate staffing levels are all critical components of this optimized process. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the performance metric issue by focusing on process efficiency, which is a core responsibility of the permitting authority. It aligns with the implicit duty to administer the concealed handgun permit system effectively and in accordance with Alaska statutes, which mandate timely processing while ensuring public safety through thorough vetting. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase staffing without analyzing the underlying causes of the delays. A more staff might seem like a solution if the core processes are inefficient. Adding personnel may not significantly improve throughput and could lead to increased operational costs without addressing the root problem. This fails to demonstrate professional diligence in process optimization. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite background checks by reducing the depth or scope of the investigation. This is ethically and regulatorily unacceptable in Alaska. Alaska statutes require a comprehensive background check to ensure the applicant is not prohibited from possessing a firearm. Compromising this essential step would directly violate the law and undermine public safety, creating a significant ethical and legal liability. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize applications based on subjective criteria or perceived urgency, rather than a standardized, objective system. This could lead to accusations of favoritism or discrimination, and is not supported by Alaska's statutory framework for concealed handgun permits, which emphasizes a consistent and fair process for all applicants. Professionals should employ a data-driven decision-making framework. This involves first defining clear performance objectives, then collecting and analyzing relevant data to understand the current state of the process. Based on this analysis, potential solutions should be identified, evaluated for their effectiveness and compliance with regulations, and then implemented. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are essential to ensure that the implemented solutions are achieving the desired outcomes and to identify any new issues that may arise. Question 14. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the need to maintain public safety and adhere to Alaska statutes, which of the following strategies would be the most effective and professionally responsible for addressing these delays? Option A. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process and implement targeted procedural improvements and interagency communication enhancements. Option B. Expedite the background check process by reducing the number of verification steps, prioritizing speed over absolute certainty in applicant eligibility. Option C. Immediately hire additional administrative staff to handle the increased application volume, assuming that more personnel will naturally reduce processing times. Option D. Implement a system that prioritizes applications from individuals with known community ties or professional roles, regardless of the order in which applications were received. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process and implement targeted procedural improvements and interagency communication enhancements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-regulated process. Delays can lead to individuals who may be eligible for a permit being unable to carry concealed firearms legally, while potentially allowing those who are not eligible to continue to do so without a permit, creating a public safety risk. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for thoroughness in vetting applicants with the imperative to process applications in a timely manner, adhering strictly to Alaska statutes. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks and implement targeted improvements. This includes analyzing each stage of the process, from initial submission to background checks and final permit issuance, to pinpoint areas where delays are most significant. For example, if background checks are consistently taking longer than anticipated, the focus would be on optimizing communication with relevant agencies or exploring technological solutions to expedite data retrieval, always within the bounds of Alaska statutes governing information sharing and privacy. This proactive and data-driven method ensures that the process is both efficient and compliant with Alaska's legal framework for concealed handgun permits, prioritizing public safety and due process. An approach that focuses solely on increasing staff numbers without analyzing the underlying process is professionally unacceptable. While more staff might seem like a quick fix, it fails to address potential inefficiencies in the workflow itself. If the current system is inherently slow due to outdated procedures or poor interagency communication, simply adding more people will not resolve the root cause and may even introduce new coordination challenges, potentially leading to errors or further delays. This approach lacks the analytical rigor required to optimize performance and risks being a costly, ineffective solution that does not align with the principles of efficient government operations as expected under Alaska law. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to relax the thoroughness of background checks to speed up processing. Alaska statutes mandate specific checks to ensure that permit holders meet eligibility criteria. Compromising the integrity of these checks, even with the intention of reducing wait times, directly violates these legal requirements and undermines the purpose of the concealed handgun permit system, which is to allow responsible citizens to carry firearms while preventing those who pose a risk from doing so. This approach prioritizes speed over safety and legality, creating significant ethical and regulatory failures. A third incorrect approach is to implement a blanket policy of prioritizing certain types of applicants without a clear, legally defined basis. Alaska statutes do not provide for arbitrary prioritization schemes. Any deviation from a consistent, merit-based processing order risks introducing bias and violating the equal protection principles inherent in administrative law. Furthermore, such a policy would likely not address the systemic issues causing overall delays and could lead to legal challenges and a loss of public trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and regulations in Alaska. This framework involves data collection and analysis to identify specific performance issues, followed by the development of targeted solutions that are both efficient and compliant. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of implemented changes are crucial to ensure ongoing effectiveness and adherence to legal mandates. The ultimate goal is to create a process that is fair, efficient, and upholds public safety as defined by Alaska law. Question 15. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the average time it takes to process new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. Considering the legal requirements and public safety mandate, which of the following strategies would be the most professionally sound and legally compliant method to address this issue? Option A. Implement an automated approval system for all applications that pass an initial basic data entry check, bypassing detailed human review. Option B. Immediately hire additional personnel to increase the volume of applications processed daily without a detailed review of the existing workflow. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, from submission through background checks and final approval, and implement targeted improvements that align with Alaska statutes, potentially including technology upgrades or process reengineering. Option D. Reduce the scope and depth of background investigations for all applicants to speed up the review process. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive workflow analysis to identify specific bottlenecks in the application process, from submission through background checks and final approval, and implement targeted improvements that align with Alaska statutes, potentially including technology upgrades or process reengineering. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the processing times for new concealed handgun permit applications in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the efficient administration of a state-regulated process. Delays can lead to individuals who are legally entitled to carry a concealed handgun for self-defense facing undue waiting periods, while potentially insufficient vetting due to rushed processes could compromise public safety. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with thoroughness, adhering strictly to Alaska statutes. The best approach involves a systematic review of the application workflow to identify bottlenecks and implement targeted process improvements that do not compromise the integrity of the background checks or the applicant screening mandated by Alaska statutes. This includes analyzing each stage of the application, from submission to final approval, to pinpoint areas where delays are occurring. Implementing technology for faster data retrieval for background checks, streamlining internal review processes, and ensuring adequate staffing levels are all valid strategies. Crucially, any proposed changes must align with Alaska statutes governing concealed handgun permits, particularly those related to applicant eligibility, background investigation requirements, and the time frame for permit issuance or denial. This approach prioritizes both applicant rights and public safety by ensuring compliance with the law while seeking operational efficiencies. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of staff processing applications without a concurrent analysis of the workflow is professionally unacceptable. While more staff might seem like a direct solution, it fails to address underlying inefficiencies in the process itself. If the system for conducting background checks is slow, or if there are redundant review steps, simply adding more people to a flawed process will not yield optimal results and could lead to errors or inconsistent application of standards, potentially violating the spirit of Alaska statutes. Another unacceptable approach is to expedite the background check process by reducing the depth or scope of the investigation. Alaska statutes outline specific requirements for background checks to ensure applicant eligibility. Circumventing these requirements, even with the intention of reducing wait times, would be a direct violation of the law and a severe compromise of public safety. This demonstrates a failure to understand the legal framework governing permit issuance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by implementing automated approvals for certain application types without human oversight or verification against statutory eligibility criteria is also professionally flawed. Alaska statutes require a thorough review to determine if an applicant meets all qualifications. Automating this process without robust safeguards and adherence to the specific criteria laid out in the statutes would undermine the integrity of the permit system and could lead to the issuance of permits to ineligible individuals, posing a risk to public safety. Professionals should employ a data-driven, legally compliant decision-making framework. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem, e.g., increased processing times; 2. Gathering data to understand the root causes; 3. Identifying potential solutions that are compliant with Alaska statutes; 4. Evaluating the feasibility and impact of each solution; 5. Implementing the chosen solution; and 6. Continuously monitoring performance to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates an individual in Alaska is inquiring about the process and requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit, expressing a desire to carry a handgun concealed for personal protection. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action to assist this individual? Option A. Provide a general overview of what the individual believes are the common requirements for concealed handgun permits based on their understanding. Option B. Advise the individual to consult the official website of the Alaska Department of Public Safety for detailed information on eligibility criteria, the application process, and relevant statutes. Option C. Inform the individual that if they have no criminal record, they are automatically eligible to carry a concealed handgun in Alaska. Option D. Suggests that carrying a handgun concealed is permissible in Alaska without a permit, provided the weapon is not openly displayed. The correct answer is B. Advise the individual to consult the official website of the Alaska Department of Public Safety for detailed information on eligibility criteria, the application process, and relevant statutes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska. The individual is seeking to exercise a right while potentially being unaware of or misinterpreting the specific legal obligations. The challenge lies in providing accurate, legally sound advice that respects both the individual's rights and the state's regulatory framework, without offering legal counsel. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves guiding the individual to the official, authoritative source of information regarding Alaska's concealed handgun permit requirements. This approach is correct because Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, specifically as 11.15. 150 outlines the conditions under which a permit may be issued, directing the individual to the Alaska Department of Public Safety, which is responsible for administering the concealed handgun permit program, ensures they receive accurate, up-to-date information directly from the governing body. This adheres to the principle of providing factual guidance without overstepping professional boundaries into legal advice. It empowers the individual to understand the specific criteria, application process, and any associated training or background check requirements mandated by Alaska law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves providing a summary of what the individual believes are the general requirements for a concealed handgun permit. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks misinterpreting or misstating the law, which is complex and subject to change. Relying on personal understanding or generalized knowledge, rather than official sources, can lead to the individual acting on incomplete or inaccurate information, potentially violating Alaska statutes. Another incorrect approach is to advise the individual that since they have no criminal record, they are automatically eligible for a permit. This is a regulatory failure because Alaska law, as detailed in as 11.15. 150, includes specific criteria beyond just the absence of a criminal record, such as age, residency, and potentially other disqualifying factors. Making assumptions about eligibility based on a single factor is legally unsound and professionally irresponsible. A further incorrect approach is to suggest that the individual can carry concealed without a permit as long as they are not actively displaying the weapon. This directly contradicts Alaska law, which mandates a permit for concealed carry. Alaska statutes clearly define what constitutes concealed carry and the requirement for a permit, making this advice a significant legal and ethical violation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a framework of providing factual information and directing individuals to the appropriate governmental agencies for specific legal requirements. The process involves 1. Identifying the core of the inquiry, concealed handgun permit requirements in Alaska. 2. Recognizing the professional boundary between providing information and offering legal advice. 3. Locating and referencing the official governing body responsible for the regulation in question, Alaska Department of Public Safety. 4. Clearly and accurately directing the individual to the official resources where they can obtain definitive and current information. This ensures compliance with regulations and protects both the professional and the individual from potential legal repercussions. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that individuals seeking to carry a handgun for personal protection in Alaska often grapple with understanding the precise conditions under which a concealed handgun permit is legally mandated. Considering Alaska Statute 11-61-210, which of the following scenarios accurately reflects the legal requirement for a permit when carrying a handgun? Option A. A person carrying a handgun concealed in a backpack that is not readily accessible requires a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. Option B. A person carrying a handgun concealed in their waistband, even if they are in their own private vehicle, requires a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. Option C. A person carrying a handgun openly in a holster while inside a retail establishment in Alaska requires a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. Option D. A person carrying a handgun openly in a holster on their hip does not require a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. Correct answer is D. A person carrying a handgun openly in a holster on their hip does not require a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance personal safety concerns with the legal requirements for carrying a concealed handgun in Alaska. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of the law, specifically regarding the definition of concealed and the conditions under which a permit is required versus when it is not. Misinterpreting these provisions can lead to unintentional violations of Alaska law, potentially resulting in legal penalties and jeopardizing the individual's ability to carry a handgun legally in the future. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while effectively addressing personal safety needs. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Alaska Statute 11-61-210, which defines when a concealed handgun permit is required. This statute specifies that a permit is generally required to carry a handgun concealed on one's person or in a vehicle. However, it also outlines exceptions, such as when the handgun is in a locked container or is not readily accessible. The correct approach is to understand these specific legal definitions and exceptions. In this case, carrying a handgun openly in a holster is not considered concealed under Alaska law, and therefore, a permit is not required for this specific manner of carry. This approach prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law as it is written in Alaska, ensuring legal compliance without unnecessary steps. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that any time a handgun is carried, a permit is automatically required, regardless of how it is carried. This fails to recognize the legal distinction between concealed and openly carried handguns in Alaska. Alaska law does not mandate a permit for openly carried handguns. Another incorrect approach is to believe that a permit is required simply because the handgun is on one's person, without considering whether it is concealed or openly displayed. This overlooks the statutory definition of concealed and the specific requirements for a permit. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely on general assumptions about handgun carry laws without consulting the specific statutes of Alaska, leading to a misunderstanding of when a permit is truly necessary. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a systematic approach to legal compliance. First, identify the specific jurisdiction and the relevant statutes governing the activity in question. In this case, Alaska Statute 11-61-210. Second, meticulously review the definitions and exceptions provided within those statutes. Third, apply the facts of the situation to the legal framework, paying close attention to how the law defines key terms like concealed. If there is any ambiguity, seek clarification from official sources or legal counsel. This methodical process ensures that actions are taken in full compliance with the law, minimizing the risk of legal repercussions and upholding professional integrity. Question 18. During the review of a concealed handgun permit application in Alaska, an applicant has provided all required documentation, including proof of firearm safety training and residency. However, the reviewing officer has a personal feeling that the applicant might be a risk due to their nervous demeanor during a brief, informal interaction. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action according to Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15? Option A. Approve the permit immediately without conducting the mandatory background check, trusting the applicant's self-declaration of eligibility. Option B. Place the application on indefinite hold pending further, unspecified observations of the applicant's behavior. Option C. Deny the permit based on the officer's subjective assessment of the applicant's nervous demeanor, as this indicates a potential risk. Option D. Proceed with a thorough background check and issue the permit if all statutory requirements are met and no disqualifying factors are found, regardless of personal feelings about the applicant's demeanor. Correct answer is D. Proceed with a thorough background check and issue the permit if all statutory requirements are met and no disqualifying factors are found, regardless of personal feelings about the applicant's demeanor. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in Alaska's concealed handgun permit application process, ensuring that applicants meet all statutory requirements while maintaining efficient processing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a thorough understanding of Alaska Statutes Title 11, Chapter 15, specifically as 1181. 430, which governs the issuance of concealed handgun permits, and balancing the need for due diligence with the applicant's right to a timely decision. Misinterpreting or overlooking statutory requirements can lead to improper denials or approvals, both of which have significant legal and public safety implications. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of all submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in as 1181. 430. This includes verifying the applicant's age, residency, completion of a firearm safety course, and crucially, conducting a thorough background check to ensure no disqualifying factors are present, such as felony convictions or specific misdemeanor offenses that prohibit firearm possession. The Alaska Department of Public Safety is mandated to issue a permit if the applicant meets these requirements and is not disqualified. Therefore, a systematic, documentation-driven verification process that adheres strictly to the statutory grounds for denial is the only legally sound and ethically responsible method. An incorrect approach would be to deny a permit based on a subjective interpretation of an applicant's demeanor during an interview, without any specific statutory grounds for disqualification. Alaska law does not grant permit-issuing authorities discretion to deny permits based on personal impressions or unsubstantiated concerns about an applicant's character if they otherwise meet all legal criteria. This failure to adhere to the specific statutory grounds for denial is a direct violation of as 1181. 430. Another incorrect approach would be to approve a permit application without completing the mandatory background check, relying solely on the applicant's self-attestation of no disqualifying offenses. This bypasses a critical statutory requirement designed to protect public safety and would be a failure to follow the mandated procedures under as 1181. 430. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay the decision indefinitely without communicating with the applicant or seeking necessary additional information, effectively preventing the applicant from exercising their legal right to a permit if they qualify. While thoroughness is important, undue delay without cause is not supported by the statute and can be challenged. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes statutory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the precise legal requirements for permit issuance and denial as defined by Alaska statutes. 2. Establishing a standardized checklist for reviewing all application components. 3. Conducting all mandated checks and verifications diligently. 4. Documenting every step of the review process. 5. Making decisions solely based on the presence or absence of statutory disqualifying factors. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clarity regarding the initial application process for a concealed handgun permit in Alaska. An applicant has completed a firearm safety course offered by a private instructor and has a valid Alaska driver's license. They are unsure if these two elements are sufficient to proceed with their application. Which of the following best describes the necessary steps to ensure a compliant application submission in Alaska? Option A. Submit the application with proof of the firearm safety course completion and the Alaska driver's license, assuming these are sufficient. Option B. Contact the local police department to confirm if a valid hunting license can substitute for the firearm safety course requirement. Option C. Verify that the firearms safety course is approved by the Alaska Department of Public Safety, and ensure the application includes a physical residential address, not a P.O. box. Option D. Use the Alaska driver's license as proof of residency and submit the application, as the firearms safety course completion is implied by holding a driver's license. Correct answer is C. Verify that the firearms safety course is approved by the Alaska Department of Public Safety, and ensure the application includes a physical residential address, not a P.O. box. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit in Alaska, balancing personal preparedness with strict adherence to legal mandates. Misinterpreting or neglecting any aspect of the application process can lead to denial, potential legal repercussions, and a failure to exercise the right to self-defense responsibly. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation is accurate, complete, and submitted according to Alaska statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly reviewing the Alaska statutes pertaining to concealed handgun permits, specifically focusing on as 1161, 210 and as 1161, 220, and ensuring all required documentation, including proof of identity, residency, and completion of a firearms safety course approved by the Alaska Department of Public Safety, is meticulously prepared and submitted with the application. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory requirements for permit issuance in Alaska, demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to legal compliance. It ensures the applicant meets all objective criteria set forth by the state for responsible firearm ownership and carrying. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting an application without verifying the approval status of the firearms safety course with the Alaska Department of Public Safety is an incorrect approach. This failure to confirm a critical requirement can lead to application denial, as the course must meet state-specific standards. It demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and a potential misunderstanding of the permit process. Providing a post office box as a residential address on the application is also an incorrect approach. Alaska statutes require a physical residential address for permit applications, and a P.O. box does not satisfy this requirement, leading to application rejection. This highlights a failure to understand the definition of residence within the context of the permit application. Assuming that a valid hunting license automatically fulfills the firearms training requirement for a concealed handgun permit is an incorrect approach. While a hunting license demonstrates familiarity with firearms in a recreational context, it does not equate to the specific firearms safety training mandated by Alaska law for concealed carry permits. This demonstrates a misinterpretation of the distinct legal requirements for different firearm-related activities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach permit applications by prioritizing a comprehensive understanding of the governing statutes. This involves actively seeking out and reviewing the relevant sections of the Alaska statutes, cross-referencing information with official state resources, and ensuring all submitted documentation precisely matches the legal requirements. A systematic checklist approach, verifying each component against the law, is crucial for successful and lawful permit acquisition. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a scenario where a concealed handgun permit holder in Alaska encounters a heated verbal dispute in a public parking lot. The other individual is agitated and gesturing aggressively, but has not physically threatened the permit holder or displayed a weapon. The permit holder feels increasingly uncomfortable and perceives a potential for escalation. If the permit holder were to draw their concealed handgun in this situation, what would be the most likely legal and ethical outcome based on Alaska's concealed handgun laws and principles of responsible firearm ownership? Option A. Drawing the handgun, while potentially escalating the situation, would be legally justifiable if the permit holder reasonably believed that the verbal dispute could imminently escalate to physical violence, even without a direct physical threat or display of a weapon. Option B. Drawing the handgun would be a legally permissible defensive action, as the permit holder's feeling of discomfort and perceived potential for escalation are sufficient grounds to prepare for self-defense under Alaska's concealed handgun laws. Option C. Drawing the handgun would likely be considered an unlawful brandishing of a weapon or assault, as Alaska law requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury, which is not present in a purely verbal dispute without overt physical threats or the display of a weapon. Option D. Drawing the handgun would be an acceptable exercise of the permit holder's right to self-defense, as the permit itself grants the authority to draw the weapon when feeling threatened, regardless of the objective level of danger. The correct answer is A. Drawing the handgun, while potentially escalating the situation, would be legally justifiable if the permit holder reasonably believed that the verbal dispute could imminently escalate to physical violence, even without a direct physical threat or display of a weapon. Explanation: the risk matrix shows a scenario where a permit holder's actions could lead to a significant increase in the probability of a negative outcome, requiring careful consideration of Alaska's concealed handgun laws and responsible firearm ownership principles. The challenge lies in balancing the right to self-defense with the paramount duty to ensure public safety and prevent negligent or reckless endangerment. A permit holder must not only understand the legal requirements for carrying a concealed handgun, but also the ethical implications of their actions and the potential consequences of misjudgment. The best approach involves a proactive and conservative assessment of risk, prioritizing de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation. This means recognizing that even a perceived threat, if not immediate and unavoidable, does not automatically justify the brandishing or use of a firearm. The permit holder must evaluate the totality of the circumstances, considering the likelihood of harm, the availability of less lethal options, and the legal standards for self-defense in Alaska, which require a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. This approach aligns with the spirit of Alaska Statute 11.81.440, which outlines justifiable use of deadly physical force, emphasizing that such force is only permissible when necessary to protect oneself or another from imminent death or serious physical injury. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any perceived threat warrants immediate defensive action, such as drawing a concealed firearm. This fails to account for the legal requirement of imminence and necessity, potentially leading to charges of assault or reckless endangerment if the threat does not materialize or if the response is disproportionate. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the permit itself as justification for any action involving the firearm, disregarding the ongoing duty to exercise sound judgment and adhere to the legal standards for use of force. This misinterprets the permit as a license for aggressive behavior rather than a privilege granted under specific conditions. Finally, an approach that prioritizes personal comfort or perceived disrespect over objective assessment of danger is also flawed, as it deviates from the legal and ethical framework that mandates a response based on genuine threat, not subjective feelings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, focusing on objective indicators of threat. This involves considering the actions and intentions of others, the environment, and the potential for escalation. If a threat is identified, the next step is to evaluate the imminence and severity of that threat against the legal standards for self-defense. Prioritizing de-escalation and seeking safe disengagement should always be the primary goal. The decision to draw or use a firearm should be a last resort, made only when there is a clear and present danger that cannot be avoided by other means, and when such action is legally justifiable under Alaska law.